Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Mindshifters Radio with your co-host, the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Rice, and his wife, Jeannie. Michael and Jeannie share with you the wisdom of the ancient Aramaic internal process of forgiveness. They offer tools and support 5 days a week. They will support you in building a solid foundation within yourself to live in pure love. In Aramaic, Rachma. Michael is the author of So Why Is This Happening to Me Again? For more information on Michael and Jeannie, please visit www.whyagain.com. And now your co-host, the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael and Jeannie Rice.
To the brightness within you, and the truth that is rooted within me.
Hi, and welcome to Mindshifters Radio with the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Rice. And you can hear him talking in the background. We are actually in the middle of a 3-day intensive here in Sarasota, Florida. Our call-in number, well, we're not going to be taking calls today. This is Aramaic Friday, and we already have Dale Hoffman with us. And, Michael, if you'll turn your phone on speaker, then our participants here can hear if they want to sit in. And so welcome, Michael, to the show, and hello, Dale.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, welcome to the show, Dale.
Hello. I'm calling from...
How are you today, sir?
I'm good. I'm calling from Winston-Salem on my way to Raleigh today. So I'm on the road again like I was a few weeks ago. Hopefully I get better reception than when I was in West Virginia on the first show. But if I have to, I'll stop. So.
Cool. Well, your voice is strong and clear.
Good.
So what kind of exciting things are happening on the road in Winston-Salem?
Well, Winston-Salem's a point to getting to Raleigh tonight. I've got an event, an Aramaic toning event using, it's a practice that goes back in the ancient Aramaic culture over 2,000 years, even before Yeshua, where they would intone the most sacred words in the language, elongating the vowel sounds, letting the consonant, like the harder sounds, kind of fall away. And you sit in a circle. What I do is I sit in a circle. Today we'll be sitting around a crystal singing bowl and intoning for most of 2 hours with long periods of meditation and just sitting. It's a really profound, reality-altering shift that really gets you out of your head and back into your body and into the true nature of what's really going on around you. It's it's amazing. You look around the room and things begin to glow. Your natural state kind of comes through. And then tomorrow I've got another morning workshop I'm doing there. So, it's life's beautiful.
Awesome. Is Dr. Tim with us? Is David with us?
They are.
Oh, good. Welcome, Dr. Tim. Welcome, David. Glad you're with us.
Glad to be here.
Cool. David, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, doing very well.
Awesome. Your voice is a little fuzzy, David.
I say I'm doing very well, just getting ready to make the trip, and a new guest will be arriving tomorrow.
Awesome.
Cool.
Very cool.
Yes.
Well, we're just in the middle of a 3-day kind of mini intensive. We're actually just getting ready to take an intermission for lunch here, and we've started into step number 1 in the reality management worksheet and the forgiveness process. So this will be an interesting conversation to put in context with that for those who are here for the workshop and choose to listen to the radio show. And otherwise, we'll be sharing these Aramaic ideas with everybody that is on the show. And so, you have the Beatitudes up on your screen? Would you? So, Dale, do you have anything that you want to start out with in our process of looking at the Beatitudes?
Well, I mean, it's always great. This is like, our 3rd week on them. They're so rich with meaning. It's really important to understand that with the Beatitudes, well, the original Aramaic Beatitudes, it was literally such as when you put this into action, what I'm sharing with you, this is going to be your result. Whereas it's become since then through all the translations. Really, I guess that really happened going into the Greek, where it became like theological promises, almost like get beaten down now in your life, and after you die, you're going to get these kinds of rewards and things. A lot of elusive things that that really, honestly, if you really look at them, don't make a lot of sense. And I'll see theologians, people that will go on for pages and pages of theology about what those translations and retranslations of the Beatitudes meant. But unfortunately, if you're not looking at something in its original language, you're kind of just shooting into the darkness, and you don't have any chance of really bringing forth what's a deeper understanding of what something meant. That doesn't mean there's not value in translations of translations, but just like Pass the Secret with 6 or 7-year-old children in a circle, you've got 20 kids in a circle, you start with a blue car was driving across the road, and in the end, a pink elephant exploded when it fell over a cliff, and it has nothing to do with the original thing, and that's just human nature. But thankfully, we're getting back to the oldest manuscripts we can get our hands on, thanks to things like the Nag Hammadi, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Khabbaras, the Peshitta. And it's really important, before we really get going, that people, to the best of their ability, really listen with open ears. And as much as possible, try to let go of trying to cognitively, within your brain, understand everything and see how it feels moving through your body, see how it feels in the energy system. Because a lot of those true shifts are things that happen outside of the brain that you can't explain in the brain, but yet you feel that shift. And it's real important to be open when we're going into the process, definitely.
Well, one of the things, as you know, Dale, that we talk about a lot in the forgiveness work is this thing called carbon-based memory, and that when someone says a word, the only thing that can be heard by the listening mind is whatever that fires in carbon-based memory. So all listening comes from brain cells, and you can only hear what you have the brain cells for. And so when somebody says a particular word, of course, the reason why the non-human mind changes the story is because when you tell me the story, it fires brain cells in me, and the story I hear is what the content of my brain cell structure is, and then I repeat that story to someone else, and it resonates brain cells in them, and they hear not my words, but what resonates in their brain cell structure, and of course on around the room, and that's how it becomes the pink elephant falling over a cliff after exploding, because each one is listening from within themselves. And so what we're looking to do with the Aramaic is to come to a comprehension of these instructions. And, I can remember when starting out with the Aramaic Beatitudes, I had been taught all my life that it was just a nice philosophy, but then getting to the point of recognizing that this isn't just about a philosophy, this is a literal instruction set for how to move to a physiological system that actually supports human life rather than a physiological system that has no human life in it and functions willy-nilly out of every hostility, fear, and wind that blows. Does that fit for you?
Oh, absolutely. And it's really important, too, to remember that even with his disciples, or the 12 that were with him basically all the time, or people listening to him, you can get in texts all over the place, including the New Testament, where even they didn't get it, where he'd say one thing, and they'd say back something else, and he'd have to correct them on it. And if you look in a lot of the Gnostic Gospels, the ones that, are quote-unquote unacceptable, there's a lot of that in there, where he would actually, like the Gospel of Thomas, he's actually poking fun at people's belief systems, and you can almost see the laughter in there. We got to remember, even, just one-on-one, before you even start passing the secret in quotes, you can lose it right there if you don't have the eyes that see and the ears that hear. It's gone immediately, and that's why I'm really recommend that people be open. People will show up at one of my events or one of yours and sometimes 20 minutes in, they go blotto, or even 5 minutes in, they just completely phase out and hear nothing after that. And that's not something that's bad. That means you're challenging the system. And it gets to that point of, you know what, in mechanics and physics we call entropy, where the system starts to break down. And if you don't allow yourself to go through that process and keep your breath moving, the system will break down. And basically, you could even fall asleep. And I've had that happen too. And I don't take that personally when I'm speaking. I just know that someone's brain is, maybe they are tired, or maybe the brain just can't hack it, and they'll just shut down. Sometimes right in the front row, which is always, it provides some pretty good entertainment if I can delicately make some jokes about it in the process. So it's a lot of fun. It really is.
Well, and my understanding is that in the Aramaic lands, if someone got up to speak about these ideas, it was actually a compliment to go unconscious, because the power that the speaker was putting forward put people into process. So there was actually a compliment for someone to go to sleep, as opposed to our culture of, well, you weren't intellectually stimulating enough to keep me awake. It's a whole different thing that in that time, in that place, it was about stepping into process, and there was an understanding of that, and that was kind of disappeared through intellectual process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've seen that happen. As a matter of fact, I can remember several times in some of your workshops where people were sort of passing out. So the good thing is I don't take that personally, and I think, well, maybe it's a good thing. So, yeah, it's pretty fascinating, actually, because when I start getting on a subject, especially, that generally is pretty wide and not the general belief that most people are sort of resting their laurels on, you can even feel the energy shift in the room. And some people just immediately will start questioning it, and you'll see their eyes kind of start to crinkle up a little bit where they're like, what, huh, what? And it's pretty profound, and that's why it's so important to read and get the CDs and DVDs of whether it's your stuff, mine, or whoever, because you'll keep listening and listening and listening. It's like, hey, how did that get in there? I heard this 30 times, and all of a sudden this is the first time I heard that. That's all building brain cells, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful process.
Right. And, of course, when we're talking about building brain cells in this work, we're not talking about building new physical structure. We're talking about the capacity of our structure to store information and to access stored information. And if we have a very low-level interpretation or understanding of, say, something, for instance, like the Beatitudes, it sounds like, oh, wouldn't this be a nice way to live? Isn't this a fun philosophy? As opposed to, oh, here's the work that needs to be done. And in order to get to a state of mind that will actually support human life. And in this work, we define human life as opposed to being a physical body. We define human life as the active presence of love. If you simply hold a newborn child, you know exactly what human life is. And so the Beatitudes are a set of instructions for how to obtain, maintain, and express a human life. So the next Beatitude, if we tap into it from the Khaburis, reads, you who have a complete, the historic translation is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. In Aramaic, what that says, a closer rendition of that is, you who have a completely purified mind, for you will comprehend the invisible source of creation. In other words, if your mind is filled with hostility or fear, then the invisible source of creation, which is the active presence of love, is going to seem to be covered over or not present, and there'll be loss of relationship with that power that flows through us and animates us, and we lose access to that because of the hostilities and fears that reside within us. So a completely sound and purified mind, in other words, one that actually functions to support our human lives. Hold a newborn child. A sound and purified mind would be one that at every turn supports the active presence of love instead of supports the insanity of every local hostility and fear, prejudice that goes on. How does that fit with your understanding, Dale?
What's interesting is that I've always said in some of my, in a lot of my talks, that the sixth Beatitude was probably the closest one when you're looking at it in Aramaic. It's probably closer than any of the others, at least from Matthew. It's probably closer than any of the others to what it actually meant in Aramaic. But I think the one thing that's really important is understanding that word heart, which in Aramaic is liba, and in this case it's blivon, which means essentially with your heart. And of course, in Aramaic, heart, it means literally the source of thinking, and it's the source of your thoughts. Where are your thoughts coming from? And in a lot of the more mystical traditions of Aramaic spirituality, the desert mothers and fathers from a couple thousand years ago, they talked about the heart being the place where thoughts and feelings, or thoughts and emotion, let me put it that way, merge and come together. And this is really, it's pretty clear. It's like when you get in there and you start to clear all that muck and all that stuff out of there, all the bushel baskets that I say, at first it feels, oh my God, this is like an unending process that never ends. And in truth, it actually is in a lot of ways. But eventually the load gets a little bit lighter. It gets a little bit lighter. It gets a little bit lighter. And you realize you're seeing deeper and you're breathing deeper. And you're standing here in front of the person that you had all of these issues tangled up, quote unquote, in your heart. And because you've been doing the Aramaic process of forgiveness, you realize that you're actually starting to have a real conscious relationship with them, rather than so much with the image in your mind that you're projecting and, that's coming from your heart, quote unquote, into your mind, into your image of them. And it's amazing that I've actually met people who, just doing one good 1 hour session of really doing deep Aramaic forgiveness, they say, oh my God, for 20 years I've been living with this man. A woman actually said to me, I've been living with this man for 20 years, and I honestly don't think I've ever met him before in my life. And she was constantly trying to put him in a box, or constantly trying to keep him from putting her in a box, or at least what her perception of it was. And she realized, oh my God. And then, of course, she goes back to him, and they were literally about to split. And she goes back to him, and she's like, Dale, I can't believe it. He changed completely. And I'm like, really? Was it him that changed? Maybe it was never him in the first place, or maybe it was both of you combined together. And that purity of heart is something, I had a direct experience with this at an event about 4 years ago, where I was just supposed to get up and recite the Aramaic Beatitudes, the first 7 from the Gospel of Matthew. And I noticed that when I got to the 6th Beatitude, I went blank. For some reason, I just had no idea where I was. I squinted my eyes, and all I saw in front of me were like filaments or striations, like threads of energy between people, but I didn't really see people. And I closed my eyes again, and I got very still, and I just said the 7th Beatitude, because I realized nobody knew what the heck I was saying anyway, unless they were counting. And it was about a year later that someone said to me, a good friend of mine, Shauna, she's like, Dale, which one did you blank out on that you saw all that light? And I went, oh, duh, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Wow, I hadn't thought of that. It's like it never dawned on me. So set in my old mindset that I didn't realize that I had that direct experience of love, and it was coming through where the bushels, at least in that moment, were off, and the light was shining. And it was one of those things that I'll remember forever, and it was exactly that, where I was so open in that moment that I had that direct experience. And, man, there's nothing that takes the place, not a million promises that can ever take the place of a step-by-step process that actually puts you in the middle of the experience. That's exactly what the Beatitudes are. Exactly.
Absolutely. And Dr. Tim, you've been sharing with us the interpretation from it's Jaya.
Jayam.
And from the fellow who did the Way of Mastery book, which you might want to tap into. There's some awesome material there that complements everything that we're doing. And he has a an interpretation of the Beatitudes that he puts out. Do you want to share what this one looks like from J.M.?
Okay, so his Beatitude 6 picks up where we left off. So he's basically saying, if you're doing what we've talked about in the first 5, wise are they who are consistently restored in this way. Like flashes of lightning, God will reveal itself in the depth of their soul.
So when
we're a
we're
little bit different. That's awesome.
Yeah, if you make your home in the breathing unity, allow your inner pain to surface, soften what was rigid within, rest in that deeper longing, get restored with radiant love, then you are wise, for you are consistently restored in this way, and like flashes of lightning, God will increasingly reveal itself in the depths of your soul.
That's beautiful.
And when that all happens, there'll be a resonance of a deeper guidance system that was put in us. If we go back to the word tuvehun, the beginning of each of the Beatitudes, it lays out a goal for living in those Beatitudes and doing the work that they inspire. And that word tuvehun that precedes each of the Beatitudes can be properly translated as a latent neural structure implanted by the Creator to guide you to happiness and well-being becomes your conscious possession, you who, and here what it's saying is you've got work to do. There's hostility, there's fear, there are things in you that don't support your human life, and those things are an overlay to the guidance system that taps you into the whole game. And so when you move to the space where you have completely cleaned out, that is, forgiven, your very capacity for hostility or fear. And this is, to me, this one is such an important one, and it actually inspired a change in the worksheet back, a few months ago, because we used to, when we were at the stage in 5B in the worksheet, it was asking that power in us to, process us through, but literally the insight that came that changed the worksheet there was, no, it's not just to process us through, it's literally to undo the very capacity for physiology, no matter what we're faced with, to undo the capacity to produce or generate any form of hostility or fear, because it's hostility or fear that is darkness. And, when they said, if the light for you is darkness, how deep will your darkness become? That is, if any form of hostility or fear is active in you, then what kind of crazy things will you do to destroy yourself? So here what's being said is that you who have a completely sound and purified mind, you've cleaned out your hostility and fear. Your mind is now a device that is the expression of your human life. If you hold a newborn child, you know that human life is about the active presence of love. A sound and purified mind would be one that contains no other frequency than that of love. And so there is, when you start to think about it, a huge piece of work to be done. And if you look at, one of the questions I'll ask people in the workshop is, how many have a computer? Yeah, okay. The first time you sit down on the computer, did you know how to operate or even turn the computer on and start the operating system? And most people are like, well, no, of course not. I didn't know anything about it. And how many hours have you spent in order to become proficient at any aspect, whether it's email or writing or whatever, doing art on your computer? And most people, it's like, well, I've spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. Okay, so you spent hundreds of hours working with and studying a computer, and it's a device that's been around for, let's say, a half a century. The original operating systems that started out with some of the most genius programmers started maybe 50 years ago, maybe a little more, a little less. So if you look at Windows, if you look at the Mac system, you got something that's had genius programmers working on perfecting it. And when something goes awry in your computer, how many hours do you spend trying to rectify, clean up the operating system to get the thing back on track? And this is something that's only been in process for 50 years. with the best programmers going. Now recognize that if you want a completely sound and purified mind, you've got some work to do. You have an operating system in you, this human operating system, that has been literally in development for thousands of generations. And those thousands of generations have had some pretty lousy programmers in them. You know, there's an ancient saying that says we live on the shoulders of giants. That's true. You do live on the shoulders of giants. That's why you can comprehend some of the things you comprehend. However, when the stress is up and the chips are down, you are controlled by the smallest mind in your genetics. Notice that no matter how often as you get into lofty thought, you say, oh, yes, love, that's the ultimate. That's where I want to go. That's where I want to live. But the next time the stress is up and the chips are down, you go right back to the lowest common denominator and the lowest mind that had input to your operating system, which is your genetics. The skill to be acquired to achieve this beatitude is no simple task. This is not a project for wimps. This is something that takes some real commitment and work, and that is to go in and clean up this multi-generational database and operating system called a human operating system. And a completely sound and purified mind would be, in computer language, would be the equivalent of saying a computer operating system with 0 faults and 0 bugs. When you think about how long this human operating system's been going, and actually in many cases it's a non-human operating system, 0 bugs in it is going to take a little time. And a lot of people are like, well, you know, I've got $10 in 10 minutes, tell me everything you know, I want to have it done yesterday. It's not going to be done yesterday. It's a process. And the reason why we do this show 5 days a week and we're here for a conversation every day is to support you in acquiring the tools with which to rewrite your human, and actually we should say the non-human operating system, because the mind based in hostility or fear is the one that this beatitude is talking about cleaning up and eradicating. When you remove your very capacity to experience anything in your world out of hostility or fear, then you've achieved this beatitude. And when you do, you will come into the awesome direct relationship you were designed for, and that is, as it says in this one, you will comprehend the invisible source of creation. You will enter into direct relationship with the active presence of love. But while your operating system has any form of hostility or fear, that lightning that Dr. Tim was just talking about isn't yours, because it's going to be covered up.
You know, in the Aramaic language, especially in the ancient Aramaic language, the word for God was Allah, which literally means absolute only being. It's amazing to think that we think of this one great God above all others, or some sort of master of the universe, He-Man kind of concept that we've got going, when in truth, in the ancient culture, the ancient Semitic cultures, there was nothing outside of God. God was the only thing that truly existed. God was actuality. But unfortunately, we have most of our experience with, maybe it's not so unfortunate because the healing process is so beautiful, but we often have our actual experience with the concepts in our mind rather than the direct presence and experience of God. And that's exactly what happens when we do the work and we clear out those spaces in ourselves that we've been trying to keep down in the darkness, not bringing them out into the light because they felt painful and they felt uncomfortable and we had so much suffering wrapped around them. But when we actually let those out into the light through this literal process, the step-by-step process that we call the Beatitudes, that's when we start to have that direct experience that was there all the time. You already are that. But unfortunately, you've piled so much gook and junk on top of it that you've lost the connection. And not that you've lost the connection, you've lost your conscious awareness to it. And it's not. You always say it, it's not Dr. Feelgood. Oftentimes, literally, it feels like it's just like it did when it went in, and that's usually why we're not looking. But you know what? There's no other way through this than to, around the process, you've got to go through it. And also, I know of no more rewarding experience. I can point everything back to Heartland in the summer of 1995 when, even after the first workshop that I had with you a few months before that, when it really clicked. And my life has never been the same. And I've always said you can try to turn away from that open door or maybe do that unconsciously, but the door, once that door is open, it never closes. And you're always going to feel that tug, whether it's in the solar plexus or wherever, that's calling you back to your true nature. And and I forgot it for a few years even, where I kind of went back into the ways of the world for a few years. But that's the idea of that prodigal son, that when you return to your true nature, I mean, it's the celebration of life, and it's amazing, and it's awesome. But unfortunately, the how-tos were really removed from our view, whether it's from confusion, lack of understanding, or even intentional manipulation. You've got to get back to the Aramaic when you're talking about the teachings of Yeshua. There's no other way to do it. And there's not a lot of people offering it on the planet either. And most people are sort of repackaging other people's work, which is good because that still gets the message out. But, yeah, it's just a beautiful process.
And what we're here to do is to hold the space for the continuous ongoing process of the work. When you recognize that you're cleaning up 1,000 generations of some of it pretty lousy programming, the operating system has a lot of bugs in it. And so we're here 5 days a week on an ongoing basis for a personal conversation to support you. If your operating system is off base, if you're in some form of hostility or fear, or you're looking to enhance your practice of the tools, that's what we're here to do. By the way, Dale, this is the last Friday in March. Are we going to be able to look forward to April being Aramaic Fridays too, do you think? Is that looking like a possibility?
I would say not yet, but I would definitely come back in the future, though, and do some more. Yeah, not quite yet, but it has been awesome. And I've actually been getting a lot of requests from people asking me when you and I were going to do something together, like an actual in-person event. So I've been getting sort of bombarded with those questions the last 3 or 4 weeks. Which
well, I'd be up for that.
So.
Yeah, we'll have to create a space to do that. Let's have a conversation about that.
Definitely.
And then let's go to the next beatitude. And the 7th beatitude is, and from the historical interpretation, it's blessed are the peacemakers; they shall be called the children of God, according to the Greeks. It doesn't exactly go like that when you get to the Aramaic, however. There are several other components. You know, the Greek translations strip away so much of the essence of the how-to and leave a hollow shell that leaves people with belief systems, but empower them or allow them to just carry on with their old hostility and fear games in a new set of clothes. So, you know, now we do good to our neighbor, but if our neighbor doesn't agree with our theology, we're willing to kill them, you know, or we're willing to condemn them, or we're willing to send them to hell. I know that Jeannie had an experience back a while back where there was a particular group of people that were supposedly condemned by another group, and when she approached this other group of people, well, wait a minute, the first law was that we were supposed to have Rockman was supposed to have love for our neighbor, and presented that to a particular preacher, and this preacher actually said that he would be praying that God would take her down for having the audacity to say such a thing. You know, it's kind of like, how dare you actually live the teachings of the man. So in Aramaic, this particular beatitude through the Kabbalah says, you who through service work effectively. And Dale, I want to acknowledge you and David and Dr. Tim, especially I want to acknowledge each of you. I talked with Michael Coughlin this morning, who's a young man who was on the show a few weeks ago, and he's the one who shared with us as a former military trainer, expert killer, and trained thousands of people how to kill very effectively, who now is working with support groups and teaching forgiveness. And I just talked with him about 2 hours ago, and he was sharing, he's in Boca Raton, Florida, with a support group every Tuesday night, he and his wife, and at the Heart Painter Studio. And he shared with us about some of the new people who were there and how they were really comprehending that this forgiveness process was about getting rid of the hostility and fear and coming back to love. And, you know, each of you is living this particular beatitude, and that is doing service. In Aramaic, there's a definite component to this beatitude of being of service. And to me, it's kind of like the rent we pay for the space we hold upon the earth. So those who through service work effectively to produce, that is, you put your energy into a particular result, and what they're saying is this work effectively to produce the peace and understanding under and in accord with God's will. So if you're working through service to others to effectively produce the peace and understanding under and in accord with the active presence of love, what this beatitude says is you will be called the offspring or the children of love, of the Creator. And this is really kind of the ultimate in reclaiming a human life, that your presence is that of this awesome, active, empowering love. Now, when you are that presence, and we'll get into the next beatitude, but when you are that presence, it's not necessarily Dr. Feelgood for the people who are hanging out with you, because that presence starts to bring up whatever it is that needs to be processed through and out of the system. And so this idea of doing service and working effectively, producing a world that functions out of the active presence of love, becomes a real key. And thank you to each of you for your contributions in doing that. And, of course, several other people who call into the show and or don't call into the show who are doing the same thing, more and more learning to be effective in producing this experience of the active presence of love. You know, I think of Julie out in Oregon. I think about Jeanette Hudan Jorgensen, who we talked to last night. She's in, let's see, where is she? She's in Salt Lake City, Utah, Sandy, Utah. Julie Haverstick is working with people all around the country and works with our intensive. She's actually going to be flying into Florida next week to assist us with an intensive there and help Jeannie with food and that sort of thing. So it's awesome to see people who are serving. And, of course, when we choose to serve, life gives us lots of opportunities to look through the eyes of hostility or fear at somebody else. And, of course, each case, that's our next piece of work, so that we come to the point where the only energy we engage in is this awesome active presence of love. And so, Dale, how does that one fit for you? And I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on it.
You know, there's a few keys in the seventh beatitude. One that really struck me as being very important. The beginning of that beatitude is tu behun lepdai shlama. Lepdai is the word that is the one that it would basically be called maker, the word maker. Lepdai shlama. Shlama is the word for peace in Aramaic. Of course, it's shalom in Hebrew. And I'll get to peace, but that word maker, what that really means is actually plant or birth. And the way I explain this to people is we think that we make things. As an example, we're thinking about this as making peace, something that we're sort of building or constructing. And when I say to people, where are you actually, if you were to make something, let's say we're putting a model train together or like a model airplane together, where are you actually doing it? They're like, well, I'm doing it with my hands. And I'm like, what is the source that's telling your hands to do that? And they're like, well, of course, it's my mind. I'm like, now this beatitude, what that lepdai actually means is not necessarily make. It means to connect in with the source of where you're making it from. It means literally to birth or plant. And the way I say with people is there's like a visualization of almost like a Johnny Appleseed that's constantly planting peace that from the center point of your being. And when we get to that word shlama, that word peace, in Aramaic, peace does not mean the absence of conflict, which is what we've come to think it means here in the West. Oh, I want, like in the Course in Miracles, will say, I choose peace instead of this. Or it's, would you rather be right or happy? And we kind of think that the absence of chaos is somehow peace, but unfortunately that's not what it means in Aramaic. Actually, it's not unfortunate. What it actually, peace means is actually the fullness of potential. So what that means is you're embracing everything that is, the truth, the actuality of what's going on around you, and you're putting your arms around that actuality. You're putting your arms around the direct experience of what is actually happening and letting go of your concepts about what is happening. And what happens is you're basically having to live it, and that's where the service comes in that if you're not living this beatitude, it doesn't happen. It's not real. And when you're coming from that place of not an absence of conflict, but actually embracing everything, that's when we experience true peace. And then down at the end of this, Da'alaha Nitkarun, where it says that channel of God, what's interesting is that word translated as children, what that means is channel, vessel, or conduit. Literally an open channel for, of course, God, Araha, which is that absolute only being. You are literally an open channel of the infinite. You could translate it sons, you could translate it daughters, but unfortunately it's gender neutral. You could translate it as children, which is nice, but it has a deeper meaning, which is, of course, that I am an open channel of that infinite, which, if you go back to the true meaning of the word Christos, if you look in Strong's Greek Concordance, Christos means channel of God. And we're so obsessive about it meaning anointed or appointed by God and all this theological stuff. But if we want to call Christos meaning anointed, which is Meshika in Aramaic, the word Messiah, if we want to say anointed, then I would say, okay, what does anointed mean? Anointing was that sacramental process where sacred oils were dabbed on the power points of the human energy system, the stigmata points and the third eye, the inside of the hands, the feet. And that was simply the ritual to symbolize the opening of the crown chakra, the opening of the highest of the 7 churches within the human energy system, which is, of course, when Yeshua said to Nicodemus, he never said you must be born again. He never said that according to the Aramaic. He said you must be born from above, which also means born from the first beginning. You must be reborn from the center point of your being before all of this other stuff was piled on top of you, and come from that true essence. Unfortunately, reborn today means birthing a new mask. I go through this great emotional process, and I have a great breakdown, which could be valid, but unfortunately then that system reinforces itself in your vulnerability in a lot of quote-unquote Christian churches. They will reinforce their own framework, their own sense in your point of vulnerability so that you now literally become a robot of the system. But really what we need to do is in that point of vulnerability to drop it all. That's the point of true forgiveness. But if we're just taking down one mask to put on another one, and then we say, really, I love you so much, unless you agree with what I agree with, unless you agree with all of these frames and all the smoke and mirrors and all these fences that I'm living within and all these beliefs and ideologies that I say are not beliefs and ideologies, you're fine unless you don't believe, and then I'm going to judge you. But oops, I forgot. He said, judge not, lest you be judged. And that's the thing. We've got to take it on ourselves because it's not going to heal in any other way. And it takes a lot of courage to come from the center point of your being and be that one that's in the presence of what seems like apparent chaos. But if you're willing to do the forgiveness real time in those moments, you'll find out that eventually it gets easier and easier until ultimately there's nothing left in your consciousness to hook. And that carbon-based memory starts to release its grip. And all of a sudden you're having a direct experience with something that was right here in your lap the entire time, but was concealed from your actual conscious view by your own masks that you were wearing. And when Yeshua called people hypocrite, that word is ape, which means mask. And it's the same word as veil. In other words, the veil of the temple. Same word, ape, hypocrite, mask. It's about coming back. I love it the way you say digital versus analog or non-being versus being. There is no substitute. There's nothing you can recreate in your mind through your own conceptual building blocks. You can't build your perfect life. You already are perfect life. What you need to do is take off the impediments to that. And that's exactly what that seventh beatitude is all about, is go back to the true essence of your being and live from that, and you will realize I am a conscious channel, a conscious child of the infinite. And I have all of the qualities of that. Doesn't mean I am God. It means that whatever God is, I am. And when I live my life consciously from that, I affect everything and everyone around me. And literally, life changes. And there's no substitute for doing the work. And the work is so precious when you get deep enough into it that you start to realize who you really are. It's just a profound... It's just amazing. I don't think there's any purpose to life outside of it. I really don't. I think everything else is an extraneous purpose outside of realizing the true nature of your being and living from that consciously. And it's beautiful.
For sure. I'm in full agreement with you, Dale. I hear you loud and clear. I'm in agreement. And, there's another little piece to that one of beware you who judge another. And it goes on to say, for that in which you judge another, you have been guilty of practicing. And what this non-being mind, what this hostility and fear-based mind lives in, is in a state of blockage of truth. So someone points a finger at someone else and rages. We've seen many examples of this with preachers who rage about all sorts of things that people out there are doing and how they're condemned and blah, 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 blah. And then once we get in the back room with them, what are they doing? What have they been caught at? Doing exactly the thing that they're railing against. And that's called blockage of truth. The one who lives out of carbon-based memory and lives in a state of denial and dissociation. And, to me, denial is Egypt. Come out of Egypt. Come out of your denial and your dissociated state, and all of a sudden you start to see that the very thing that you hate the most in your world, the thing that you rail against, is the thing that's defiling your own state of being. And the reason why there's so much upset, agitation, rage about it, people don't want to look at or talk about, the person who does this or the person who does that, because that's exactly what that person is doing, but blocking it from their own awareness. And so it is this cleaning up of one's own mind that allows one to start to see, oh my God, why did I rail against that one instead of stand as a space of love? Now, that doesn't mean that I need to accept everything that everybody's doing. That's not a requirement of the law. The requirement is that I maintain my human life, whatever anybody's doing. And the only things I'll give up my human life, this awesome presence of love for, are the very things my own physiology has been engaging in and that produce rage, grief, fear, anger, sadness, hatred, vengeance towards somebody out there. At least it looks like it's out there, but it's something that's generated within my own physiology. And I can't live this particular beatitude of working effectively to produce the peace and understanding that's under and in accord with the presence of love, because I am not yet the presence of love. And this whole set of beatitudes we've been looking at for the last 4 shows, and if you've missed the earlier shows, you can go back in the archives over the last 4 weeks, or 5 weeks, pardon me, Jeannie tells me, counting today. You go back over each of those, and we started out with this idea of Tuvehun, that activating the neural structure the Creator put in us and living in the eternal forces from God rather than the judgmental mind that lives in denial and dissociation and blames somebody else for what's going on in them. If you're feeling any form of hostility or fear, guess what? You've got work to do. You're not designed as a human life to have even the slightest experience of hostility or fear, no matter what anybody in the world is doing. And when you recognize that, you do the work. You clean up your own database. you clean up your own operating system, you get to the point where, you stand in front of the worst of the most, what people would call the most disgusting person in the world, and you are the presence of love because there's nothing else in you. Now you can extend that love to this person who's lost in their own grief, pain, loss, hatred, vengeance, hostility, fear, degraded, whatever it happens to be. And as you do, you become one who works effectively to extend the peace and understanding that is in accord with the will of the presence of love in your life. And so that's our Beatitude, this seventh Beatitude. And Dr. Tim, what does Jan have to say about it? You with us, Dr. Tim?
Yep, I had my mute button on, sorry.
Oh, okay, cool.
So his Beatitude version says, ripening in new wholeness, they shall become as channels for new creations, serving the same restoration in others.
There's also another aspect to that is it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't recognize what's off, quote unquote, in the world or in another person. It means that you're willing to do your own work in relation if that triggers anything within your system. And it's a difference, and I want people get confused by thinking that means I won't see where something's off. That doesn't mean you won't see that something's off. It means that you're not emotionally unconscious in the process of seeing it, pointing out there at someone else, but recognizing that place inside of yourself that has that rub with it. And you'll be able to actually make conscious action to bring that love into the world so that those kinds of sort of systems and things, exactly what Tim was just saying, where we're working for the common good, which is almost like a hearkening back to the fourth Beatitude also, that when you really live on a level playing field with everybody, that you'll realize, there is no separation between me and you. There's only Allah, which is God, and there's nothing outside of God.
Right. And when somebody's off, you won't be off. You'll still stay connected to the active presence of love. And if you're not connected to the active presence of love, if the behavior this other person does resonates some form of hostility or fear in you, then you'll go, here's my next piece of work in obtaining a completely sound and purified mind, living in the active presence of love, and bringing that forward. So there's that service component of bringing forward through service the active presence of love and offering simply that presence in the way of support. And then, of course, when you do that, and we're down to the eighth Beatitude, and I like to call the folks who live in the eighth Beatitude, we sometimes call them the eighth Beatitude crew, because when someone comes close to this work and this awesome presence of love is there, it creates such a field of empowerment that everything unlike love starts to surface, starts to come up. And when it gets to a certain level of intensity, most people turn tail and run. And as they're turning tail to run, they'll have a whole story about why they can puke on you. So this Beatitude is historically interpreted a latent neural structure implanted by God, guides you in happiness and well-being, will become your conscious possession. You who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. That's the traditional interpretation or translation of it. And what it's speaking of here is that if you are the active presence of love, you are an empowering state. And as that empowered state, other people's hostility and fear, your own as well, but other people's hostility and fear will come to the surface. And oftentimes, if they're not ready to process that, not ready to look at that, not ready to deal with that, they literally will turn and puke on you. And so, to be committed to maintaining that state, no matter what it says is, yours is the kingdom of heaven. And in Aramaic, that kingdom of heaven means yours is the community of love, that you create that community and you let the person who holds their hostility or fear simply process through whatever it is that they need to process through. And oftentimes they'll turn tail and run like, I'm out of here. And they'll have a whole story about you, and they'll make it all up about you. But really what's happening is it's the healing process. And one who, rather than buying into that, can maintain that condition of love, because the first 7 Beatitudes has been their work in maintaining that condition of love. They create a space of process for the insanity, that is, those things that are out of harmony with love, to come forward for healing. So oftentimes, in a really powerful active space of love, people's anger, sadness, rage, grief, pain, hatred, vengeance, terror, viciousness will come to the surface. One of the things that you want to do if you're holding that space is there are 2 very important skills that need to be developed, and that is that you need to know when to hold the mirror up and when to duck so that you maintain your head. If you remember, John the Baptist was the forerunner of the Christ. Being the forerunner of the Christ meant that each one of us would meet our own John the Baptist. What did they call John the Baptist? He was the raving maniac in the desert. What does all that mean? The desert is another term for the unconscious. So each of us who's going to fully enter into the active presence of love is going to have to meet somebody who's going to resonate or reach into our unconscious states and bring up everything we don't want to deal with. Most people living in blockage of truth put that stress into their brain's image of another, and that's the whole John the Baptist story. Remember, he gave or delivered information to the king and queen that they were in blockage of truth of. Their stress went up, and they took off his head. If you're going to do this teaching, be aware that somebody may want to take off your head. And this Beatitude simply describes that. Learn when to duck, when to hold the mirror up. Dale, what are your thoughts on that one?
Just since I know we're in honor of a little bit of time left, I can say that we can cap all 3 of those final Beatitudes in that they all have the same sort of quality to them. Certain words, radapo, certain words keep popping up in those last 3 Beatitudes that basically say when you're dislocated for the sake of coming from truth, living from truth, that you may be knocked off your center, but understand essentially that where you were was not your center. Where you are now is your center, and wherever you go, there you are. It's that in every situation in your life, you keep committed to coming from truth, living from your rooted center, and understanding that if you get knocked off that center, your job is to get back to that center. Forgive whatever it is that let you get kicked off that center and go back to that center and live from that consciously. And those last 3 Beatitudes are almost like they're different from the quality of the first 7, but they're a great cap on top of them if you can comprehend it. There's not a lot I can really add in. You really, honestly, you kind of encapsulated all 3 of those last Beatitudes right there in what you said.
Cool, Dale. And Dr. Tim, what does Jayam say about this Beatitude?
Well, he separates it into 3. Then comes the birthing power that forces you further from your old habits, that you may touch more deeply your true home in divine mystery. And then number 9, others will project, attack with vicious words, or even separate from you, because your creations threaten them. No, they seek to divert your unfolding in spirit. And the last one, resolve to increase your radiant aliveness, dissolving the last vestiges of fear as your union matures fully. All before you who awakened to divine purpose likewise passed through this final learning.
Oh, and it is a piece of learning to be that clear that you're going to stay connected. We're down to the last few seconds. Dale, we really appreciate you being with us. DaleAllenHoffman.com is his website. There are DVDs, CDs, schedule of the presentations that he's doing around the country. And Dr. Tim, we appreciate you. Your website, CNH2
counseling.com. CNH.counseling.com.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you guys, and we hold the space for a blessing. And come back and join us on Monday. We'll look forward to hearing from you, and have the best year yet of your eternal life. Take care. Blessings. Bye-bye.